Picture this. You're at a public event with your family, trying to enjoy a peaceful day, when suddenly everything you hold dear is threatened in the worst way imaginable. Your 12-year-old daughter, minding her own business, is tossed by a woman, yes, a complete stranger, who thinks she has the right to control who belongs and who doesn't. It's every parent's worst nightmare, watching your child collapse in pain, feeling completely helpless. But that's not where the story ends. No, in a split second, this parent made a choice that would flip the script entirely and leave everyone in shock. This isn't just about standing up for what's right, it's about taking back control in the most powerful way possible. What happened next is something you have to see to believe. Stay with me as we dive into this unbelievable turn of events. Welcome back, everyone. Let me take you to a place where you expect peace, a place where families come together to enjoy each other's company, a simple community event. But for me and my family, what should have been a carefree afternoon quickly turned into a nightmare. My 12-year-old daughter, who was minding her own business, suddenly found herself on the receiving end of something unthinkable. A woman, someone we didn't know, decided that she had the right to control not just the space around her, but who belonged in it. This Karen didn't just flash us a dirty look or make some passive-aggressive comment. No, she crossed a line that no parent should ever have to witness. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought maybe I misjudged the situation. But when I saw my daughter collapse in pain, my worst fears came true. She had been tossed by this woman with no regard for who she was or what she represented. My heart shattered into pieces, and I was consumed with rage. I felt helpless. How could anyone do something so vile to a defenseless child? My mind raced through a million thoughts in an instant. But the one thing I knew for sure was this. I wasn't just going to stand there. I wasn't going to let this slide. What happened next? Well, that's when the real story begins. And trust me, it's one you won't forget. The sun was setting on what should have been an ordinary Saturday afternoon at the community park. Families gathered, kids played on the swings, and the air buzzed with the sounds of laughter and chatter. My wife and I were sitting on the park bench, our eyes occasionally drifting over to our 12-year-old daughter, Mia, who was playing with a few other children. Her wheelchair was parked nearby, her usual spot in the middle of all the action as she smiled and laughed with her friends. Mia had a condition that left her dependent on the chair, but she had never let that stop her from being the vibrant, social butterfly she was. That's when I saw her. The woman I'd come to know as the infamous Karen of the neighborhood, a middle-aged woman with a penchant for judging everyone around her. We'd crossed paths before in passing at various community events, and I always kept my distance. She had a reputation for being difficult, to say the least, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. It started with a passing glance. I saw her eyeing Mia from across the park. Her eyes narrowed with a look I couldn't quite place. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, Mia was used to people staring, especially in a wheelchair. But this was different. There was something more calculating in her gaze. My instincts started to scream at me, urging me to watch her closely. Seconds later, Karen stood up from where she had been sitting near the picnic tables and began walking toward Mia. At first, I thought she might just be coming over to introduce herself or perhaps offer some small talk. But as she drew nearer, I saw her facial expression darken. She wasn't walking with the same casual stride that you'd expect from someone just want to chat. Her movements were purposeful, sharp. There was a sense of tension in the air, a prelude to something bad that I couldn't shake. I shot a quick glance at Mia, who hadn't noticed the approaching woman. Her face was lit up with excitement as she showed her friend something she had just learned to do with her wheelchair, a new trick she was proud of. She didn't see the storm headed her way. I knew I had to act, but I didn't know what was about to happen would escalate so quickly. I stood up and started walking toward them, just as Karen reached Mia. "Excuse me," Karen said in an overly loud, almost theatrical voice, "but do you mind moving that wheelchair out of the way? It's blocking the walkway." I stopped in my tracks. My mind raced. I had heard enough. "Excuse me," I muttered under my breath, my jaw tightening. I glanced over to Mia, whose smile had faltered, confusion creeping across her face. "What did you say?" Karen's eyes never left Mia's wheelchair as she continued, "This path is for everyone. You're blocking the way. It's a safety issue." Mia's face went pale. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was simply enjoying her day, like every other child in the park. But to Karen, her presence, her wheelchair, her very existence seemed like an inconvenience. I marched over, standing between Karen and Mia, my body tense. "She's not blocking anything. She's having a good time. You can walk around her just like everyone else does," I said, my voice firm but not yet angry. But Karen wasn't backing down. She raised her voice, turning it into something more accusatory, more demanding. "This is a public park, and I have every right to walk where I want. Move her. Now." A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just about a wheelchair being in the way anymore. This was about control, power, and a blatant disregard for another person's dignity. I could feel my blood beginning to boil. The nerve of this woman to speak to my daughter like that, to treat her like an obstacle in her perfect little world. Mia's eyes began to well up with tears, and I couldn't bear to see her like this. She was a strong girl, but no one, especially not this woman, should make her feel like she didn't belong. I knelt down beside her, trying to hide my growing frustration. "Mia, don't worry. You're fine. Let's just get through this." But before I could comfort her further, Karen stepped forward, her hand reaching for the back of Mia's wheelchair. "I said move it," she sneered. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped in front of Karen, blocking her from getting any closer to Mia. "Don't touch her," I warned, my voice low and controlled, though the tension in my chest threatened to break through. Karen's face twisted into a smug smile. "You don't tell me what to do, loser," she spat. The words stung. But it wasn't the words that were worrying me. It was the dangerous glint in her eyes. I could sense something worse was coming. "Karen, this is your last warning," I said, the anger in my voice escalating. "Leave her alone." But before I could even react, she snapped. I heard a sound, something sharp, something that didn't quite register until it was too late. The taser. In an instant, Karen drew a small, black taser from her bag and pressed it against Mia's chest, her finger pulling the trigger. My heart stopped. Time slowed. I could hear the electric buzz before my mind even caught up with the horror unfolding before me. The next thing I knew, Mia's body convulsed violently, and she slumped back in her chair, her hands frozen at her sides. "Mia!" I screamed, rushing toward her. But the world around me seemed to blur. I couldn't hear anything but the pounding of my own heart, the ringing in my ears as my hands scrambled to check if she was breathing. She was unconscious, her body limp, but thank God she was still alive. Karen stood there, stunned, her taser still in her hand, a look of shock on her face, probably from the fact that she'd actually gone through with it. I saw red. I've never felt anger like that before, a primal fury that overtook every rational thought. This wasn't just about protecting my daughter anymore. This was about making sure this woman faced the consequences of her actions. I picked myself up, my mind clear now, focused only on one thing, revenge. I would not let this go. The shock of seeing Mia incapacitated was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford to lose my focus. Her body was still trembling from the effects of the taser, her eyes fluttering, barely conscious. I gritted my teeth and knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I tried to steady her. The world around me had become a blur. But one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't going to let this woman get away with what she'd just done. My mind raced. I needed to help Mia first, but I also knew I couldn't let Karen walk away from this. No one was going to get away with hurting my daughter. Not on my watch. "Hang in there, Mia," I muttered, my voice tight with fear. My fingers pressed against her wrist, searching for a pulse. I could feel her heartbeat, slow but steady. My heart, however, was pounding out of my chest as I carefully lifted her, trying not to cause any more pain. "Call 911, someone screamed from behind me, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't waiting for anyone to take action. The anger that had been building inside me since Karen had first approached Mia was now a burning fire searing through every inch of my body. I glanced up and saw Karen standing a few feet away, her hand still gripping the taser, like she was ready to use it again. Her eyes flickered from Mia to me, almost as if she didn't fully comprehend what she'd just done. For a split second, I thought I saw a flash of uncertainty in her eyes, but it quickly turned into smug defiance. "You're going to regret this," I growled, my voice barely containing the fury that threatened to burst out. Karen scoffed, looking down at her taser. "I don't think so," she sneered. "She shouldn't be in the way. It's her fault." That was it. Every ounce of restraint I had left vanished in an instant. I stood up shaking with rage and took one step toward her. The world around me seemed to fade. The only thing that mattered was the woman who had just put my daughter in harm's way. "Do you think you can just get away with this?" I demanded, my voice rising. "You tossed my daughter, a defenseless child, because she was sitting in a wheelchair? For what? Your own comfort. You think that gives you the right to hurt her? To harm my family?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "It's not my fault she's in a wheelchair," she snapped. "It's her problem, not mine." I could feel my fists clenching so tightly that my knuckles went white. The rage inside me was no longer just about her words. It was about the sheer audacity, the entitlement, and the cruel indifference she displayed to a 12-year-old girl who had done nothing to her. "You've crossed the line," I said, my voice low but deadly calm. "No one hurts my daughter and gets away with it." I could feel the blood rushing to my face, the heat of fury burning every inch of my skin. This was not a conversation anymore. I wasn't standing there begging for mercy or explanations. This was war. Karen looked back at Mia, her expression faltering for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, holding her taser in front of her like a shield. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. "Good," I muttered, not taking my eyes off her. "Because you should be afraid." With one swift motion, I grabbed Mia's wheelchair and began to wheel her away from Karen, positioning myself between her and my daughter. I wasn't about to let this woman get any closer. The crowd had gathered now, murmurs rising around us. Some people were on their phones, others were just staring, unsure of what to do. But none of that mattered. It wasn't their child, and it wasn't their fight. I needed to make sure Mia was okay, and I wasn't going to let Karen disrupt that. But Karen wasn't done. She took a step forward, and I turned to face her. "Back off," I said, the threat clear in my voice. "You don't want to make this worse." She looked at the taser in her hand, then back at me, her face flushed with anger. She was unhinged, barely keeping herself in check. I could see her trembling now, not with fear, but with the kind of rage that only people like her could possess, people who believe their entitlement gave them the right to hurt others. "You're going to regret messing with me," she said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "I'll have you arrested. I'll—" "Shut up," I interrupted, my patience running out. "You've already done enough." And then something in me snapped. I grabbed the taser from her hand before she could even react, my movements fast and precise. It was a blur of motion, the weapon was in my hand, and before Karen could process what was happening, I jammed the barrel of the taser right into her face. "Now, you listen to me," I said through gritted teeth, my voice cold and deadly calm. "You hurt my daughter. You'll pay for it. If you ever touch her again, if you ever do anything to hurt her or anyone else like this, I'll make sure you never see the light of day again. You hear me?" Her eyes widened in shock as she looked down at the taser, now pressing against her mouth. She opened her mouth to say something, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more lies or excuses. The crowd was silent, all eyes locked on the confrontation. For a moment, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Justice, or at least a taste of it, was in my hands. Karen stood frozen, her face pale, her defiance slipping away as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She realized she had lost control. She was no longer the one calling the shots. I was in control now. "Apologize," I said, my voice sharp. She didn't answer, still frozen in shock, and that was all I needed to see. I wasn't going to beg for her apology. I wasn't going to waste another second of my time with this woman. I shoved the taser back into her hands and pushed Mia's wheelchair toward the exit. "Let's go, Mia," I said, my voice softening as I looked down at my daughter, still pale, but regaining consciousness. "We're getting out of here." As I wheeled her away, I heard Karen muttering something behind me, but I didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. I had just stood up for my daughter, and that was something I would never apologize for. As I pushed Mia's wheelchair through the park, the chaos from the confrontation with Karen seemed to linger in the air. The whispers from the crowd were becoming a dull hum, but my mind was still sharp, focused solely on Mia. My heart raced, and my fists clenched involuntarily as I recalled what had just happened. Every image from that moment, the taser pressed against my daughter's chest, the shock on her face as her body convulsed, the chilling smugness of Karen's expression, was burned into my memory. But I couldn't think about it for too long. Mia was still unresponsive, and I couldn't afford to let my emotions take over. She was everything to me. I needed to make sure she was okay. That was my priority now. "Mia," I whispered, my voice shaking, "can you hear me, sweetheart?" Her head tilted slightly, and I saw her eyes flutter open, just a little, as though she were trying to focus on something. The relief that rushed through me was so intense it almost knocked me off balance. But then I saw her wince, and my stomach dropped. "Mia, it's okay. You're okay," I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm, though I felt anything but. She blinked a few times, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was still dazed, struggling to come to terms with what had just happened. My fingers gently cupped her face, trying to comfort her. But the reality of the situation kept crashing over me. She had been hurt. She had been hurt by a complete stranger, someone who had no right to treat her like that. I could feel the rage building again, but I had to push it down. We reached the park bench where my wife was sitting, and her face turned from worry to shock as she saw Mia's condition. "What happened?" she asked, jumping up immediately. "Karen," I said, my voice tight. She tossed Mia. "For no reason. Just because her wheelchair was in the way. We need to get her to the hospital." Mia's eyes were still unfocused, but she seemed to recognize her mom's voice. Her lips parted, trying to speak, but her voice was a mere whisper, barely audible. "Mom, it hurts." I couldn't bear hearing her like this. "It's okay, Mia. We're going to get you help," I assured her, even though I was fighting to hold back tears of my own. My wife's face went pale as she saw the bruising starting to form on Mia's chest. The taser's contact had left marks, dark, angry marks that were already swelling. It was a sobering reminder of just how badly Karen had crossed the line. I took out my phone and dialed 911. My hands were trembling so much that I could barely hold the device steady. As the phone rang, my mind flashed back to Karen's cruel words. "She's in the way. It's her fault." I could feel the heat rise in my chest again, but I took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. I had to focus on Mia. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice crackled through the line. I rushed to explain, my words spilling out in a torrent. "My daughter's been tossed. She's 12 years old. A woman attacked her in the park. I don't know if she's okay. Please send help now." The dispatcher reassured me that an ambulance was on the way, but it felt like hours before I could see the flashing lights in the distance. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. I didn't care about Karen anymore. I didn't care about the crowd or the fact that my face probably looked like it had been through hell. All I cared about was getting Mia the help she needed, making sure she was okay. When the paramedics finally arrived, I felt like I could breathe again. They moved with precision, their experience shining through as they assessed Mia's condition. They checked her vitals, strapped her to a stretcher, and began to prepare her for transport to the hospital. My wife and I were in a daze. The reality of what had just happened hadn't fully set in yet. How could someone do this to a child? How could someone so casually hurt a helpless person just to satisfy their own sense of superiority? As we climbed into the back of the ambulance with Mia, I couldn't help but replay everything that had happened. I felt the urge to go back to the park, find Karen, and make her answer for what she'd done. I imagined what it would be like to confront her, to make her feel the fear and powerlessness I had felt in that moment. But I knew it wasn't the time for that. I needed to be here for Mia to stay focused on making sure she was okay. The ambulance ride was a blur. I kept my eyes fixed on Mia, watching her as she slowly drifted in and out of consciousness. She was in pain, but her eyes would occasionally flicker open, and I could see the confusion in them. She was struggling to understand what had just happened, why this woman, this stranger, had decided to hurt her. And I didn't have the answers. I wished I could tell her that it was all going to be okay, that everything would go back to normal. But I couldn't. I knew things wouldn't be the same anymore. Not after this. When we arrived at the hospital, a team of doctors rushed to meet us. They quickly moved Mia into the emergency room, hooking her up to monitors and running tests. We were led to a waiting room where the minutes stretched on like hours. I sat there, trying to process everything. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. What had driven Karen to do this? Was it pure malice? Or was there something more? Maybe she had been having a bad day, or maybe it was something deeper, some sort of unresolved hatred. I couldn't understand it, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was Mia's recovery. The doctors came in and assured us that the taser hadn't caused any long-term damage, but the emotional toll was just as heavy. Mia would need time to heal, time to process what had happened, and we'd be right there with her every step of the way. As I sat there, I thought about the woman who had caused all of this. I thought about Karen and the smug satisfaction on her face when she had used that taser on my daughter. Part of me wanted to go back and confront her, to make her pay for what she had done. But then I realized Karen wasn't the problem. The problem was people like her who thought they had the right to impose their will on others. The problem was that people like Karen felt entitled to hurt those who couldn't fight back. Mia wasn't just a victim of her actions. She was a victim of a mindset, a belief that some people can get away with anything because they think they have power over others. And that was something I couldn't let slide. It wasn't just about defending Mia, it was about standing up for what's right. As the doctor came in to give us an update on Mia's condition, I looked at my wife. We hadn't said a word in what felt like forever, but she knew what I was thinking. We both knew that this wasn't over. We were going to make sure Karen faced the consequences of her actions. But for now, all that mattered was Mia, and we were going to do everything in our power to help her heal. The hours in the hospital felt like they were stretching into eternity. Time moved slowly, as if the clock itself was grieving alongside us. Mia had been admitted into the intensive care unit for observation, and though the doctors assured us she was physically stable, her emotional and psychological state was another matter entirely. Every time she opened her eyes, her gaze was distant, unfocused, as though the trauma she'd experienced was still too fresh, too vivid in her mind. I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but I could feel the barrier of what had happened between us, thick and unspoken. My wife and I had spent the entire night in the waiting room, both of us sitting in silence, too overwhelmed to even try to talk. I had replayed the incident in my mind over and over, trying to figure out if there was something I could have done differently, some way to have prevented what had happened. But no matter how many times I ran through the situation, the outcome was always the same. Karen had crossed a line, and my daughter had paid the price for it. At 4 a.m., the doctor finally came to see us. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, but I could tell she was tired. She hadn't left her post since we arrived, working to ensure that Mia was recovering. I stood up as she entered the waiting room, hoping for some sign that we were making progress, that Mia was pulling through. She's stable, the doctor said, her tone reassuring but not overly optimistic. There are no signs of internal damage from the taser. Her heart rate and blood pressure are normal, and her wounds are being treated. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. For a moment, the tightness in my chest loosened, and I allowed myself to relax just a little. But the doctor continued, her eyes flickering toward the floor. There's no denying that the emotional impact of this incident is severe. She's in a state of shock right now. It might take some time before she fully comprehends what happened and how it's affected her. She may also experience feelings of anxiety, fear, and depression. I nodded, my heart sinking. I had known, on some level, that this wasn't just about the physical injury. Mia's mind was fragile, and this trauma, this violation, would stay with her for far longer than any bruises or burns could. I understand, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. What can we do for her? What's the next step? The doctor offered a small, sympathetic smile. The best thing you can do right now is be there for her. She needs emotional support. She needs to feel safe and loved. If she starts showing signs of distress, or if she refuses to talk, that's normal. But I'd suggest some counseling when she's ready. She may also benefit from some therapy sessions to help her process the trauma. I nodded again, this time more firmly. Thank you. We'll do whatever it takes. The doctor gave us a brief summary of Mia's treatment plan and promised to check on her again in the morning before leaving us alone in the waiting room. As the door closed behind her, the silence returned, this time thicker, more suffocating. I turned to my wife, but the words I wanted to say felt stuck in my throat. I hate this, my wife said softly, her voice breaking the stillness. I hate that she had to go through this. I hate that we couldn't protect her. I crossed the room and sat beside her, taking her hand in mine. We couldn't have known. We couldn't have predicted what Karen would do. I know, she whispered, squeezing my hand, but it doesn't make it easier to swallow. I wanted to say something comforting, to reassure her that everything would be okay, but I couldn't lie to her. The truth was, this wasn't just about a random act of violence. This was about a person, Karen, choosing to dehumanize our daughter simply because of her disability. I had seen the look in Karen's eyes. She hadn't seen Mia as a child who deserved kindness and respect. She had seen her as an obstacle, an inconvenience, something beneath her. That thought alone was enough to set my blood boiling once again. But I couldn't lose control. Not now. Not when Mia needed us to stay strong for her. We need to get her through this, I said, my voice low and determined. We'll do whatever it takes. No matter how long it takes. We won't let her face this alone. My wife nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. But what do we do about Karen? What happens to her? I paused, my mind racing. The anger still burned inside me, and the thought of Karen getting away with what she'd done was almost too much to bear. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was a deeper issue here, a systemic problem with how people like Karen treated others. People with disabilities were often viewed as weak, as less than, and as much as I wanted to take matters into my own hands, I knew that wasn't the answer. We had to fight back, but we had to do it the right way. We'll go through the proper channels, I said finally. We'll make sure she's held accountable. What she did was illegal. She can't just walk away from this. My wife wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. You're right. We'll go to the police. We'll make sure she pays for this. I didn't know if that would make Mia feel any better, but it was the least we could do. Justice had to be served. I couldn't stand the thought of this woman, this Karen, continuing to live her life as though she hadn't just torn ours apart. We spent the rest of the night in the waiting room, keeping each other company in the uncomfortable silence, waiting for the morning to come so we could check on Mia again. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep. I awoke to the sound of soft footsteps. It was the doctor again, this time with an update on Mia. She's awake, the doctor said, a warm smile on her face. She's asking for you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I squeezed my wife's hand and stood up. Let's go see her. We made our way down the sterile, brightly lit hallways, the weight of everything we had endured still heavy on my shoulders. But for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. Mia was awake. She was fighting. And so were we. As we walked into her room, Mia's eyes locked onto mine and a small, tentative smile appeared on her face. She was still pale, still frail, but seeing her awake and aware made all the difference in the world. "Hey, sweetie," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "Hi, Dad," Mia whispered, her voice weak but steady. She paused, taking a deep breath. "Is it over?" I nodded, sitting beside her. "It's over now, but we're going to take care of you. We'll get through this together." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with the innocence that was still untouched by the trauma she had faced. "I'm scared, Dad," she admitted. I gently took her hand, holding it tightly. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to make sure you're safe. We're going to make sure no one ever hurts you like that again." And in that moment, I knew that no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, I would protect my daughter with everything I had. We would get through this together. The morning after Mia woke up, it was like the world outside the hospital had paused. The usual noise of traffic, the hum of the city, the ordinary, everyday world continued on as though nothing had changed. But for us, everything had changed. Mia's life had been violently disrupted, and we were now on a path to make sure that disruption wasn't going to be ignored. My wife and I sat by Mia's bedside, waiting for her to open up to say something, anything about what had happened. The doctor had warned us that Mia might experience a range of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. We knew that healing wasn't just about fixing the physical wounds. It was about helping her deal with the trauma, the emotional scars that would linger long after the bruises had faded. As the morning passed, Mia remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the wall opposite her hospital bed. She was no longer the vibrant girl who had once filled a room with laughter. Her eyes were distant, haunted by the memory of that moment in the park when Karen had pressed that taser to her chest. I could see her trying to push it all away, but the weight of what she'd experienced was too much to ignore. It wasn't until my wife gently touched her hand that Mia's expression changed. She looked up at her mom, a mixture of vulnerability and confusion in her eyes. "Mom," Mia whispered, her voice cracking, "why did she do it? What did I do wrong?" I could feel my chest tighten as I heard those words. I had feared that she would blame herself, that this would become something that would fester inside her. The thought that Mia might think she had done something to provoke Karen's cruelty made my heart break all over again. "You did nothing wrong, Mia," my wife replied softly, her voice full of emotion. "You were just being you. You were just enjoying your day. And she was the one who did something wrong." Mia's eyes welled up with tears. "But I don't understand why she would hurt me. Why did she think it was okay?" I swallowed hard, the anger rising in me once again. How could anyone, how could Karen, do something like that to a child? To my child? Some people have a hard time understanding that everyone deserves respect, I said, my voice hoarse. "But what she did wasn't your fault, Mia. You didn't do anything wrong. We're going to make sure she faces the consequences of her actions. No one gets to hurt you like that and get away with it." Mia nodded slowly, though I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. The doubts, the questions, still lingered in her eyes. She was scared. Scared of the world. Scared of people. And I couldn't blame her. "Will it happen again, Dad?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell her that everything was going to be okay, that this was just a one-time thing, but I couldn't lie to her. The truth was, there would always be people like Karen in the world. People who believed they had the right to control others, to belittle them. But that didn't mean we couldn't fight back. That didn't mean we had to stay silent. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice firm. "It won't happen again. We're going to make sure of that." It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do in that moment. I could promise her that we would stand by her, that we would fight for her. But I couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be others who would try to tear her down. What I could promise was this: we wouldn't let anyone hurt her again. As the days passed, Mia's physical condition improved. The burns and bruises from the taser faded slowly, and she started to regain some of her strength. But emotionally, she was still fragile. She didn't want to leave the hospital room. She didn't want to go outside, to be around people. Every sound seemed to startle her. Every time someone walked too close, I could see her flinch. It was heartbreaking to watch, knowing that the world she once felt safe in now felt like a dangerous, unpredictable place. That's when I realized we needed to do more. The hospital visits, the doctors, the therapy sessions, they were important, but they weren't enough. Mia needed to feel like she had control again. She needed to reclaim some part of her life that wasn't defined by fear. One afternoon, after Mia had taken a short nap, I took her outside to the hospital courtyard. It was a quiet spot, shaded by trees with benches and a small fountain in the middle. The sun was shining, but there was a cool breeze in the air. I could tell she was hesitant at first, but I encouraged her to join me. We sat on one of the benches, and I let her take it all in. No pressure, no expectations. "Do you remember the park?" I asked her gently, watching as she looked out over the small garden. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant again. I remember playing there." Before, her voice faltered, and she quickly wiped a tear from her cheek. "You know," I said, taking her hand in mine, "I think we should go back there. Not today, not yet. But someday, I want you to have your park back. To know that it's not a place for fear, but a place where you're free to be you, where you're safe. And we'll be with you every step of the way." Mia's lips trembled slightly as she looked up at me. "You'll be there?" "Always," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. "You're never alone in this." We sat there for a while, just the two of us, soaking in the quiet, peaceful moment. I knew it wasn't a cure-all, that Mia would need time to process everything. But it was a start. It was a way for her to take small steps toward healing, to start believing that the world could still be a good place despite what Karen had done. As the days went on, I focused on making sure Mia felt empowered again. I took her out for short walks around the hospital, and each time we returned, she seemed a little stronger. I could see her starting to open up, starting to trust the world again. Bit by bit, she started to talk more about what had happened, not the details, but how it made her feel. And every time she did, I made sure she knew that she wasn't weak for feeling scared. She was strong for facing it. At the same time, I wasn't going to let Karen get away with what she'd done. I contacted the police, making sure the incident was officially reported. I knew that the legal process would take time, but that didn't matter. This wasn't just about justice for Mia, it was about sending a message. No one should ever feel like they have the right to hurt someone, no matter who they are or what they believe. We weren't going to let that mindset take root. We weren't going to let people like Karen win. By the end of the week, Mia was ready to go home. The doctors had given us the green light, and though I could tell she was still processing everything, she seemed more at peace. She had her moments of fear, but she also had moments of hope. And that was all I could ask for. As we walked out of the hospital together, hand in hand, I felt a surge of pride for my daughter. She had been through hell, but she was still here, still standing. And she would continue to stand no matter what. The weeks following Mia's discharge from the hospital were a delicate balance of progress and setbacks. The emotional wounds were still raw, and Mia's recovery was more than just physical. Though her burns had healed, the psychological scars were something that would take time. At home, we did everything we could to make her feel safe again. Her room, once filled with the laughter of her friends and the chatter of a girl who loved life, had become a quiet sanctuary. The windows were open wide to let the sunlight in, the smell of fresh flowers from the garden outside bringing a semblance of normality back to the house. Yet, as peaceful as it looked, the air felt thick with the tension of unspoken fears. We had tried to create a sense of normalcy for Mia, but it wasn't always easy. The world outside had changed for her. The confidence she once had in going out, even in a wheelchair, had been shattered. She was afraid. She was afraid of the park, of being around strangers, of being out in public, where people could hurt her. Every time we went outside, she was visibly anxious. It was heartbreaking to witness, but I knew we had to be patient. The road to recovery wouldn't be a straight line. It would have its ups and downs, its moments of darkness and light. And I promised myself I would be there for every single step of it. One afternoon, a few weeks after we got home, I sat on the porch with Mia, watching the sun dip low in the sky. The air was cool, and the sounds of the neighborhood were a soft hum in the background. Mia had been quieter than usual, her fingers tracing patterns on the edge of the railing. She hadn't spoken much since we'd returned from the hospital, and it was starting to weigh on me. I knew she was processing everything what Karen had done, the trauma she'd endured, but I also knew that keeping it all inside wouldn't help. Mia, I said gently, my voice softer than usual. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? She didn't answer at first. I wasn't sure if she even heard me. But then, after a long silence, she finally spoke. Dad, what if it happens again? She asked, her voice tinged with fear. Her eyes were staring at the ground, but I could tell she was wrestling with the thought. What if I'm not strong enough to fight back? The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could feel my chest tighten, the urge to protect her surging inside me. But I had to stay strong for her. For us. You don't have to fight back, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What happened wasn't your fault. And it won't happen again. We're going to make sure of that. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide and filled with the kind of pain only a child who had been hurt could understand. But what if it does? What if there are people like her out there and I can't stop them? I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts before speaking. This wasn't just about reassuring her. It was about helping her understand that no one could ever truly take away her power, her sense of self-worth. Not even Karen. You are stronger than you think, Mia. I said, my voice firm but filled with love. You don't have to fight with your fists or your strength. The power you have comes from your heart, your kindness, your courage. You've already shown so much bravery by facing what happened. And every day you take a step toward healing is another step toward reclaiming your power. Her eyes softened, but the fear was still there, lingering in the depths of her gaze. It wasn't easy for her to believe what I was telling her, not when the memory of Karen's attack still haunted her. But I knew this was just one of many conversations we would have. Each time, we would build on her strength, piece by piece, until she could finally believe in herself again. That night, after Mia had gone to bed, my wife and I sat in the living room, the weight of the day's conversation hanging heavily between us. There was so much we still had to work through as a family, and so much Mia still had to heal from. I could see the exhaustion in my wife's eyes, the same look of worry and helplessness I had seen in myself too many times. I don't know if we're doing enough, she said quietly, her voice cracking with the emotion she'd been holding in. I hate seeing her like this. I hate that this is what she's going through. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We're doing everything we can. We're here for her. We're not going anywhere. I know, she whispered, her head resting against my shoulder, but I feel like we need to do more. We need to take action. We need to make sure Karen is held accountable for what she did. I knew she was right. We had been focusing so much on Mia's recovery, on the emotional and physical healing, that we hadn't fully addressed the fact that Karen still hadn't faced any real consequences. We'd reported the incident to the police, but the wheels of justice turned slowly, and the legal system wasn't always swift in cases like this. But we couldn't wait for things to happen on their own. We had to take action. The next morning, I made a call to a lawyer I knew, someone who had experience with cases involving assault and civil rights. I explained everything to him, from the moment Karen had tossed Mia to the aftermath that had left our family in turmoil. He assured me that we had a strong case, but that it would take time. Legal battles were rarely quick, and we would have to be patient. But he also promised that we would fight until Karen was held accountable. In the meantime, Mia continued her therapy sessions. At first, she had resisted, but gradually she began to open up. She spoke about what had happened, how she felt, and what she was afraid of. Each session was a small victory, and I could see her beginning to heal, slowly but surely. One evening, a few weeks after we had started the legal process, Mia came to me with a serious look on her face. She had been more quiet lately, and I could tell something was on her mind. Dad, she said, her voice hesitant. I want to go back to the park. I want to take my wheelchair there again. I want to prove to myself that I'm not afraid anymore. My heart swelled with pride. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be instant, but it was a huge step forward. You're sure? I asked, my voice filled with emotion. She nodded, her eyes sparkling with a newfound resolve. I have to. I need to show that I'm stronger than what happened. I'm not going to let her win. I smiled, trying to keep my own emotions in check. We'll go together. I'll be right there with you. And so, the next day we returned to the park. It wasn't easy, but we walked slowly with Mia in her wheelchair, her hand tightly gripped in mine. I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the remnants of the fear that had taken root in her. But I also saw something else, determination. She was taking back control of her life, piece by piece. We spent the afternoon there, sitting under the same tree where she had once played. And this time, it wasn't the fear that filled the air, it was the beginning of healing. Slowly, we were building a new chapter, one where Mia would not be defined by the cruelty of one person, but by her strength, her resilience, and her unbreakable spirit. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what Karen had done to us, no matter how hard it had been, Mia had emerged stronger. And so had we. As we continue on this journey of healing, we want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight back for what's right? How did you find the strength to keep going? Drop a comment below and let us know. Your story could inspire someone else who's going through something similar. And if you believe no one should ever get away with hurting someone else, hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates on our journey for justice. We're in this together, and together, we'll make sure that no one ever feels powerless again